The small police station buzzed with nervous energy as another call came through the radio. Detective Maria Santos watched 3 rookie officers scramble for their gear, their faces pale with determination mixed with fear. The voice on the radio was calm but urgent. Another armed robbery at a convenience store on 5th Street. This made it the 7th one in 2 weeks, and the young officers had failed to catch the perpetrator every single time. Officer Jake Morrison was the first to reach his patrol car, his hand shaking slightly as he fumbled with his keys. At 24, he had graduated from the police academy just 6 months ago with top honors. His textbook knowledge was impressive, but the streets had proven to be a different teacher altogether. Behind him, Officers Sarah Chen and Marcus Williams rushed to their own vehicles, their radio chatter filled with anxiety. The 3 rookies had been assigned to this district because it was supposed to be quiet. The veteran officers called it a breaking-in zone, where new cops could learn the ropes without facing serious danger. But something had changed in recent weeks. A string of robberies had shattered the peace, and each time the young officers responded, they found themselves outmaneuvered by criminals who seemed to know their every move. Jake's first encounter with the robber had been a disaster. He had arrived at the scene to find the store clerk tied up and the cash register emptied. The security camera showed a masked figure who moved with practiced ease, but by the time Jake had secured the scene and called for backup, the trail had gone cold. His report was thorough, his procedure by the book, but the criminal had vanished into the night. Sarah's experience wasn't much better. She had actually spotted the suspect fleeing from her second robbery, but her pursuit had ended when she took a wrong turn and lost him in the maze of back alleys. Her radio calls for assistance came too late, and the other units couldn't coordinate effectively. She spent the rest of that shift filling out paperwork and questioning witnesses who had seen nothing useful. Marcus had come closest to making an arrest. During the 4th robbery, he had arrived while the crime was still in progress, but his hesitation at the door had cost him precious seconds. By the time he had called for backup and approached the store, the robber had escaped through a back exit that Marcus hadn't known existed. The store owner was grateful that no one was hurt, but Marcus felt the weight of his failure. The local newspaper had started running stories about the incompetent rookie squad that couldn't catch a simple thief. The headlines stung, but what hurt more was the disappointment in their sergeant's eyes during each debriefing. Sergeant Rodriguez had been patient at first, offering advice and additional training. But as the failures mounted, his frustration became obvious. The community was losing faith too. Store owners in the district had started hiring private security guards and installing expensive alarm systems. Some had even talked about closing early to avoid becoming targets. The robberies weren't just about money anymore. They were destroying the sense of safety that held the neighborhood together. In the police station break room, veteran officers would shake their heads when discussing the rookie team. Some made jokes about sending them back to the academy for additional training. Others wondered if modern police training was too focused on theory and not enough on real-world experience. The pressure was building from all sides. Jake often lay awake at night replaying each failed pursuit in his mind. He had joined the police force to make a difference, to protect people and serve his community. Instead, he felt like he was letting everyone down. His girlfriend had stopped asking about work because she could see how much it troubled him. His parents, who had been so proud when he graduated from the academy, now offered worried encouragement that felt hollow. Sarah threw herself into studying police procedures and criminal psychology, hoping to find something she had missed. She spent her off-duty hours reading case files and watching training videos. Her apartment was filled with notebooks containing detailed analyses of each robbery, trying to find patterns that might help her anticipate the criminal's next move. But textbook knowledge seemed useless when faced with the unpredictable reality of street crime. Marcus had started questioning whether he was cut out for police work at all. His confidence, once unshakable, had crumbled with each failed operation. He found himself second-guessing every decision, freezing up when quick action was needed. His training officer had warned him that self-doubt could be dangerous in this job, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't good enough. The 3 rookies had developed an unspoken bond through their shared failures. They would sit together during breaks, offering each other encouragement while privately wondering if they would ever prove themselves worthy of wearing the badge. Their conversations were filled with, what-if scenarios and promises to do better next time. As the 8th robbery call came through, Jake looked at his reflection in his patrol car window. The young man staring back at him looked tired and uncertain. He had imagined this job very differently during his academy days. Back then, he thought courage and good intentions would be enough. Now he understood that police work required something more: experience, instinct, and the kind of street wisdom that only came from years of facing real danger. The radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice giving details about the latest incident. Another convenience store, another masked robber, another chance for the rookie team to prove themselves. As Jake started his engine and prepared to respond, he couldn't shake the feeling that this pattern would continue until something fundamental changed. Little did he know that change was about to arrive in the form of a scarred veteran who had been watching their struggles from the shadows. The 8th robbery ended like all the others, with the 3 rookies standing in an empty store, staring at scattered merchandise and a traumatized clerk. The robber had struck during the evening rush when the store was busiest, making his escape in the confusion of panicked customers. Jake had arrived first this time, followed quickly by Sarah and Marcus, but their coordinated response felt clumsy and ineffective. As they gathered evidence and took statements, none of them noticed the figure watching from across the street. Detective Ray Coleman leaned against his unmarked car, his weathered face hidden in shadow. At 52, Ray had spent 28 years on the force, and the lines around his eyes told stories of cases that had ended well and others that still haunted his dreams. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from a knife fight with a drug dealer 15 years earlier. Ray had been on medical leave for the past 3 months after a shootout that left him with 2 bullets in his shoulder and a commendation for bravery. The physical wounds had healed, but the department psychiatrist insisted he wasn't ready to return to active duty. Too much stress, they said. Too many years of seeing the worst of humanity. Ray knew they were probably right, but watching these kids fumble through crime scenes made his fingers itch for his badge and gun. The robbery pattern had caught Ray's attention from his hospital bed. He had read every report, studied every witness statement, and mapped out each incident on a board in his apartment. While the rookies saw random crimes, Ray recognized the work of someone with experience. This wasn't just a desperate addict looking for quick cash. This was a professional who understood police procedures well enough to stay one step ahead. During his recovery, Ray had started taking long walks through the district where the robberies occurred. He told himself it was physical therapy, but really he was working the case in his mind. He had noticed things the rookie reports missed: security camera blind spots that suggested prior surveillance, escape routes that required local knowledge, and timing that indicated someone familiar with police response patterns. From his observation point, Ray watched Jake interview the store clerk for the 3rd time, hoping to extract some detail that might provide a lead. The young officer's technique was textbook perfect, but he lacked the instinct to read between the lines. Ray could see the clerk's nervousness wasn't just from the robbery. There was something else, some detail the man was holding back. Sarah was documenting the crime scene with methodical precision, photographing every angle and measuring distances between overturned displays. Her thoroughness was admirable, but Ray noticed she was missing the subtle signs that might reveal how the robber had cased the store beforehand. Small scratches on the back door lock, fresh mud tracked in a pattern that didn't match customer traffic, a cigarette butt near the dumpster that didn't belong to any of the store employees. Marcus stood guard at the entrance, keeping curious onlookers at bay while maintaining radio contact with dispatch. His posture was rigid with concentration, but Ray could see the self-doubt in the way he constantly checked and rechecked his equipment. The young officer was so focused on following protocol that he wasn't paying attention to the street itself, missing the small details that might provide clues about the robber's method of operation. Ray's phone buzzed with a text from his partner, Detective Lisa Park, who was still working cases while he remained on leave. She was asking for his thoughts on the robbery pattern. Knowing his reputation for solving difficult cases, Ray had trained dozens of officers over the years, but he had never seen a group struggle this badly with what should have been a straightforward investigation. The veteran detective remembered his own early days on the force, working under a gruff sergeant who believed in learning through trial and error. But those were different times, when a rookie cop could make mistakes without social media and 24-hour news cycles broadcasting their failures to the world. These young officers were under pressure that Ray's generation had never faced. As the rookies finished their work and prepared to leave the scene, Ray made a decision that would change everything. He had been content to watch from the sidelines, telling himself that his enforced retirement was a chance to step back and let the next generation handle things. But watching these dedicated young officers fail repeatedly, while a criminal ran free in his old neighborhood, was more than he could bear. Ray pulled out his phone and dialed Captain Morrison's direct line. The captain answered on the second ring, his voice tired from dealing with the political pressure surrounding the robbery case. City council members were demanding answers. The mayor's office was asking pointed questions about police effectiveness, and the media was having a field day with the story of incompetent rookie cops. The conversation was brief but decisive. Ray's reputation preceded him. He had solved more cases than any detective in the department's recent history. His clearance rate was legendary, and his methods, while sometimes unconventional, always got results. The captain listened as Ray outlined his observations about the robbery pattern and his concerns about the rookie team's approach. Within an hour, Ray received official word that his medical leave was being cut short. He would be returning to active duty immediately, assigned as a temporary supervisor to the 3 rookie officers. His job would be to solve the robbery case while training the young cops to be more effective investigators. It wasn't the gentle return to work that the department psychiatrist had recommended, but Ray felt a familiar surge of energy at the prospect of hunting down a criminal again. That evening, Ray sat in his apartment studying the case files one more time. Tomorrow he would meet with Jake, Sarah, and Marcus for the first time in an official capacity. He wondered how they would react to suddenly having their freedom and authority curtailed by a scarred veteran, who many in the department whispered had seen too much action for his own good. Ray understood their situation better than they knew. Every cop went through a period of self-doubt, usually in the first year when the reality of police work collided with academy ideals. The difference was that most rookies had experienced partners to guide them through the rough patches. These 3 had been thrown into deep water and left to sink or swim on their own. As he prepared for bed, Ray felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. 3 young careers hung in the balance. A criminal was terrorizing local businesses, and the community's faith in their police department was eroding with each passing day. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of either a comeback story or a final failure that would define these rookies for the rest of their careers. Ray had no intention of letting it be the latter. The next morning arrived with an uncomfortable tension in the police station. Jake, Sarah, and Marcus had been called to report early for a special briefing, but nobody had explained what it was about. They sat in the conference room, exchanging worried glances and wondering if they were about to be reassigned or worse. The string of failed investigations had left them expecting the worst. When the door opened, they were surprised to see Captain Morrison enter, with a man they recognized but had never met. Detective Ray Coleman's reputation preceded him like a shadow. Every officer in the department knew his name, and most had heard stories about his methods. Some called him a legend, others whispered that he was a relic from a more violent era of policing. All agreed that he got results. Ray's appearance was as intimidating as his reputation. The scar on his face was more prominent in the harsh fluorescent lighting, and his gray eyes seemed to take in everything at once. He moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to expect danger around every corner. His suit was neat but showed signs of wear, like a tool that had been used extensively and maintained carefully. Captain Morrison made the introductions brief and to the point. Ray would be taking over the robbery investigation effective immediately. The 3 rookies would continue working the case, but now under his direct supervision. Morrison's tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion or a temporary arrangement. It was an order that came from the highest levels of the department. After the captain left, Ray spent several minutes studying the 3 young officers in silence. His gaze was analytical rather than judgmental, like a mechanic examining an engine to understand why it wasn't running properly. Jake felt the urge to fill the silence with explanations or excuses, but something in Ray's demeanor suggested that would be a mistake. When Ray finally spoke, his voice was gravelly from years of cigarettes and late-night stakeouts. He didn't waste time with pleasantries or motivational speeches. Instead, he went straight to the heart of the problem. The robberies weren't random, he explained. They were being committed by someone with law enforcement knowledge, possibly a former cop or someone who had studied police procedures extensively. Ray spread out a map of the district on the conference table, marking each robbery location with a red pin. To the rookies, the incidents had seemed scattered and unpredictable. But Ray showed them a pattern they had missed. Each store was located near a major intersection with multiple escape routes, and all had security systems that could be disabled quickly by someone who knew what they were looking for. The veteran detective pulled out a timeline that he had constructed during his weeks of unofficial observation. The robberies occurred at specific intervals that corresponded with shift changes at the local police precincts. The robber knew exactly when response times would be longest and when the fewest patrol cars would be in the immediate area. This level of planning suggested someone with inside knowledge. Sarah raised her hand tentatively, as if she were still in the police academy. She had noticed some of these patterns but hadn't been confident enough to voice her theories. Ray listened to her observations without interruption, then built upon them with details she had missed. It was the first time in weeks that any of the rookies felt like their work had value. Marcus mentioned the cigarette butt he had seen at one of the crime scenes, but hadn't thought to collect as evidence. Ray's expression remained neutral, but he made a note to return to that location. Experience had taught him that seemingly insignificant details often broke cases wide open. The fact that Marcus had noticed something the crime scene technicians missed showed promise. Jake admitted that he had felt like the store clerks were holding back information during his interviews, but he hadn't known how to get them to open up. Ray nodded grimly. Intimidation was a powerful tool, and their robber was clearly using it effectively. The clerks weren't just afraid of being robbed again. They were afraid of what might happen if they cooperated too much with police. For the first time since the robberies began, the three rookies felt like they were part of a real investigation, rather than just going through the motions. Ray's approach was different from anything they had learned in the academy. He didn't rely on textbook procedures or standardized protocols. Instead, he read situations like a book, picking up on subtle cues and hidden meanings that revealed the truth beneath surface appearances. Ray outlined their new strategy with military precision. They would revisit every crime scene, but this time they would look for evidence that previous investigations had missed. They would re-interview witnesses, but with questions designed to uncover details about anyone who might have been watching the stores in the days before the robberies. Most importantly, they would start thinking like criminals instead of just reacting like cops. The veteran detective assigned specific roles to each rookie based on their individual strengths. Jake would focus on building rapport with the store owners and employees, using his natural charm to overcome their reluctance to share information. Sarah would handle the technical aspects of the investigation, analyzing security footage and mapping out the robbers' movements with the precision that had impressed Ray. Marcus would work on surveillance and neighborhood canvassing, using his keen observation skills to spot details others might miss. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Ray delivered a warning that chilled all three rookies. The robber they were hunting wasn't just stealing money, he was escalating. Each robbery had been more brazen than the last, and the level of intimidation used against store employees was increasing. Ray had seen this pattern before, and it usually ended with someone getting seriously hurt or killed. The stakes had just gotten higher. What started as a series of property crimes was evolving into something more dangerous. Ray's presence meant they finally had the expertise needed to catch their suspect. But it also meant acknowledgement that the situation had moved beyond what rookie officers could handle alone. That afternoon, Ray took the three rookies back to the first robbery location. Standing in the store where their string of failures had begun, he showed them dozens of clues they had missed. Scratch marks on the door frame where lockpicks had been tested, a vantage point across the street where someone could observe customer patterns. Small details that, when assembled correctly, painted a picture of careful planning and professional execution. For the first time in weeks, Jake, Sarah, and Marcus felt hope stirring in their chests. They had a veteran detective who believed the case could be solved, and more importantly, he was willing to teach them how to think like real investigators, rather than academy graduates playing at being cops. The hunt for their elusive robber was about to become much more interesting. The transformation began immediately. Ray's first order was to abandon everything the rookies thought they knew about the case and start over from scratch. They would treat each robbery scene like it was brand new, approaching with fresh eyes and different questions. This time, they wouldn't just document what had been stolen, they would try to understand the mind of the person doing the stealing. At the second robbery location, Ray demonstrated investigative techniques that weren't taught in any academy textbook. He showed Jake how to read body language during witness interviews, pointing out the subtle signs that indicated when someone was holding back crucial information. The store clerk, who had seemed cooperative during the original investigation, was clearly terrified of something more than just being robbed again. Under Ray's patient questioning, the truth emerged. The robber hadn't just demanded money. He had known specific details about the store's operations that suggested prior surveillance. He knew which register contained the most cash, where the security camera blind spots were located, and even asked about a safe that wasn't visible from the customer area. This level of inside knowledge was disturbing. Sarah worked alongside Ray to analyze security footage with new perspective. Instead of just looking for the robber's face, they studied his movements for professional habits. The way he moved through the store showed familiarity with security protocols. He avoided certain angles where cameras might capture identifying features, and his timing suggested knowledge of how long it would take police to respond to the alarm. The most chilling discovery came when they enhanced the audio from one of the recordings. Ray's experienced ears caught something the rookies had missed. The robber's voice had a slight accent that suggested military or law enforcement training. His commands were short, precise, and designed to maintain control without unnecessary violence. This wasn't a desperate amateur. This was someone with professional experience in handling dangerous situations. Marcus proved invaluable during the neighborhood canvassing phase. Ray taught him to ask different questions than the standard police script. Instead of just asking if anyone had seen suspicious activity, they inquired about anyone who had been asking questions about local businesses or strangers who seemed to be paying too much attention to security measures. The responses painted a picture of systematic reconnaissance. An elderly woman who lived above one of the targeted stores remembered seeing the same man drinking coffee at a bus stop across the street on 3 different occasions in the week before the robbery. He had appeared to be reading a newspaper, but she noticed he was actually watching the store's patterns of customer traffic. When she mentioned this detail to the original investigating officers, they had dismissed it as insignificant. Ray's approach to evidence collection was revolutionary to the 3 rookies. He didn't just gather what was obviously relevant. He collected anything that might become important later. The cigarette butt that Marcus had noticed was retrieved and sent for DNA analysis. Fingerprints were lifted from surfaces that previous investigators had ignored. Security footage from neighboring businesses was requisitioned to track the robber's approach and escape routes. The veteran detective's methods extended beyond traditional police work. He had Jake visit each store as a regular customer, observing the daily routines and identifying potential vulnerabilities that a professional criminal might exploit. Sarah was assigned to research recent parolees with robbery convictions and law enforcement backgrounds. Marcus monitored police radio traffic to understand response patterns that the robber might be using to time his attacks. As they worked together, Ray began sharing stories from his decades of experience. Not war stories or boastful tales, but practical lessons about how criminals think and operate. He explained how desperation drove different behaviors than greed, how professional criminals planned differently than amateur opportunists, and how to distinguish between the two by examining their methods. The rookies found themselves learning more in a few days under Ray's guidance than they had in months of working alone. His teaching style was hands-on and immediate. When Jake struggled to get a witness to open up, Ray stepped in to demonstrate rapport-building techniques. When Sarah became frustrated with technical analysis, he showed her how to think like the person who had created the evidence she was studying. Most importantly, Ray taught them to trust their instincts while backing up hunches with solid investigation. Police work wasn't just about following procedures, it was about developing intuition and learning to read situations that didn't fit standard patterns. The rookies began to understand why experienced officers seemed to know things that weren't obvious to newcomers. The breakthrough came during their 4th day working together. Marcus was reviewing security footage from a gas station 3 blocks from the latest robbery when he noticed something unusual. A man matching their suspect's description had purchased cigarettes using cash at the exact time when the robbery was taking place. Initially, this seemed to rule him out as a suspect, but Ray's experience suggested a different interpretation. Professional criminals often established alibis by appearing on camera at locations near their actual crimes. The timestamp and location created reasonable doubt, while still allowing them to be in the area for operational purposes. Ray had seen this technique before, usually employed by someone with law enforcement training who understood how investigations worked. The gas station footage was clearer than anything they had captured at the robbery scenes. For the first time, they could see their suspect's face clearly enough for identification purposes. Ray studied the image with the intensity of a hunter examining tracks. Something about the man's features seemed familiar, triggering memories that had been buried under years of cases and faces. When Ray finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made all three rookies pay attention. He thought he knew who their robber was, and if he was right, they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than a simple thief. The investigation had just taken a turn that would test everything the veteran detective had learned during his long career, and everything he had been trying to teach his three young partners. That evening, as they prepared to dig deeper into their suspect's identity, Ray felt the familiar mixture of excitement and dread that came with closing in on a dangerous criminal. The rookies could sense the change in their mentor's demeanor, though they didn't yet understand what it meant. They were about to learn that some cases required more than good police work to solve. Sometimes they required courage to face enemies who knew exactly how to fight back. Commander Williams smiled as she looked toward the back of the audience. Our speaker today joined the Navy when he was just 18 years old, straight out of high school in a small town in Montana. He had never seen the ocean before arriving at boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois. Marcus stood up slowly, straightening his cap as he began walking toward the front. Several people in the audience turned to see who was approaching the podium, including the 5 young SEALs who had been making comments earlier. This man completed SEAL training in 1997, during one of the most challenging periods in the program's history. The commander continued. His class started with 180 candidates and graduated only 23. Jake Morrison's smile faded slightly as he watched the older civilian walking down the aisle. Something about the man's bearing seemed different now that he was moving with purpose toward the stage. After graduation, he was assigned to SEAL Team 3, where he served with distinction for 8 years, Commander Williams went on. During that time, he completed multiple deployments to some of the most dangerous regions in the world. Ryan Collins and Tony Martinez exchanged glances. The quiet man they had been mocking was now standing just a few feet from the podium, waiting patiently for his introduction to conclude. In 2004, during his 3rd deployment to Afghanistan, this SEAL volunteered for a mission that would define his entire career, the commander said, her voice growing more serious. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a mountain compound near the Pakistani border. The mission required a small team to infiltrate through hostile territory and gather critical information. Marcus remained standing quietly beside the podium, his hands clasped behind his back in a relaxed military stance. His expression was calm and humble, showing no sign that he was aware of the growing attention from the audience. The mission went according to plan until the extraction phase, Commander Williams continued. The team's helicopter was shot down by enemy fire, leaving 4 SEALs stranded in enemy territory with no immediate backup available. The entire audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. Even the families who had been whispering among themselves were focused intently on the commander's story. For 3 days and 2 nights, this SEAL and his teammates evaded capture while calling in their own rescue. They had limited ammunition, no food, and were constantly pursued by enemy forces who knew the terrain better than they did. Jake Morrison felt a knot forming in his stomach as he began to understand who they had been talking about earlier. The man standing near the podium wasn't just any veteran. He was someone who had lived through experiences that most people could barely imagine. On the 2nd night, one of the team members was severely wounded by shrapnel from a mortar round, the commander said. Despite being injured himself, our speaker carried his wounded teammate for over 6 miles through mountain terrain to reach the extraction point. Marcus shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the detailed attention being paid to what he considered simply doing his job. He had never liked having his actions highlighted this way, preferring to let his service speak for itself. All 4 team members were successfully extracted, and the mission intelligence proved crucial in subsequent operations, Commander Williams continued. For his actions during those 3 days, this SEAL was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action. Ryan Collins swallowed hard, realizing how wrong their earlier assumptions had been. The man they had dismissed as a wannabe was actually a decorated war hero, standing just a few feet away from them. But that mission was far from the end of his service, the commander went on. He went on to complete 2 more deployments to Iraq, where he participated in over 40 combat operations. He was promoted to Senior Chief Petty Officer and became a team leader responsible for training the next generation of SEALs. Tony Martinez looked down at his hands. Feeling ashamed of the comments he had made earlier, he thought about his own training, how difficult it had been, and tried to imagine what it would be like to face real combat with lives depending on his decisions. After retiring from active duty in 2010, this man didn't simply fade away into civilian life, Commander Williams said. He founded a nonprofit organization that provides support and resources to wounded veterans and their families. Over the past 15 years, his organization has helped more than 3,000 veterans transition back to civilian life. The audience began to murmur with appreciation, but the commander wasn't finished. He also volunteers his time training law enforcement SWAT teams across the country, sharing his expertise in tactics and leadership developed during his years of service. Marcus checked his watch, hoping his introduction would wrap up soon. He had prepared a simple speech about teamwork and dedication, nothing too elaborate. He preferred to keep things straightforward and practical. In addition to his nonprofit work, he serves on the board of directors for 3 other veteran organizations and has testified before Congress twice about veterans' issues. The commander continued. He holds a master's degree in counseling psychology, which he earned while working full-time to better serve his fellow veterans. Jake Morrison felt his face growing warm with embarrassment. He thought about all the assumptions he had made based on the man's appearance, about how he had judged someone without knowing anything about their background or achievements. Perhaps most importantly, Commander Williams said, this man embodies the SEAL ethos every single day. He lives the values of honor, courage, and commitment, not just during his military service, but in everything he does as a civilian. She turned to face Marcus directly. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, United States Navy retired. The audience erupted in applause as Marcus stepped up to the podium. The 5 young SEALs who had been making jokes earlier were now clapping harder than anyone else, their faces showing a mixture of respect and deep embarrassment. Marcus adjusted the microphone and looked out over the crowd. His eyes briefly met those of Jake Morrison, who was staring at him with obvious regret. Marcus gave him a slight nod and a small smile, indicating that no offense had been taken. Thank you, Commander Williams, for that very generous introduction, Marcus began, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had faced real challenges and survived them. And congratulations to all of today's graduates. You've accomplished something truly extraordinary. He paused, looking at each of the young SEALs in the front row. I know you're all eager to begin your careers as active duty SEALs, and you should be proud of what you've achieved here at Coronado. But I want to talk to you today about what comes after graduation, about the real challenges you'll face as you begin serving your country. The morning air was thick with tension as the team took their positions around Chen's Corner Market, the small grocery store that Sarah's analysis had identified as Valdez's most likely next target. It was located at a busy intersection with multiple escape routes, had minimal security coverage, and operated with just 1 clerk during morning hours. Everything about it fit the pattern they had identified. Ray felt the familiar weight of his service weapon as he adjusted his position near the store's rear entrance. 28 years of police work had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was screaming that today would end with violence. Valdez wasn't just a common criminal anymore. Prison had transformed him into something more dangerous, someone with specialized knowledge and nothing left to lose. Jake's voice crackled through the radio from his position across the street. A man matching Valdez's description had been spotted entering the store, wearing a baseball cap and keeping his head down to avoid the security cameras. The moment they had all been preparing for was finally at hand. Ray gave the signal to move into position, and 3 months of preparation condensed into a few crucial seconds. Inside the store, Valdez approached the counter with practiced calm. The elderly clerk, Mr. Chen, looked up with the friendly smile he gave all his customers, unaware that he was about to become the victim of the district's most wanted criminal. Valdez's hand moved toward his jacket pocket, where intelligence suggested he kept a pistol that had never been recovered from his police days. Sarah moved quickly to cover the front entrance while Marcus positioned himself to block the side alley that had served as an escape route in previous robberies. Their months of failed investigations had taught them the importance of coordination, and Ray's training had refined their natural instincts into professional competence. For the first time since the robberies began, they felt like real police officers rather than academy graduates playing at law enforcement. The confrontation began when Valdez produced his weapon and demanded that Mr. Chen open the register. But years of experience had made Ray patient, and he waited until the crime was fully committed before making his move. Legal technicalities had destroyed too many cases, and he wanted to ensure that Valdez couldn't claim he was just making a purchase when everything went wrong. Ray entered through the rear door with his weapon drawn, using skills honed through decades of dangerous situations. His voice was steady and professional as he identified himself as police and ordered Valdez to drop his weapon. The ex-cop's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of surprise, his face showed recognition and something that might have been respect for Ray's tactical approach. What happened next lasted only seconds but felt like hours to everyone involved. Valdez spun toward Ray while keeping his pistol trained on Mr. Chen,